Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I wanted to bless you with my summary of our 1000 YouTube subs celebration stream that we did just a few days ago on April 2nd. I'll be posting the VODs as well, so it's up to you whether you want to watch just the summary or the full however many hour stream it ended up being. It was intended to be a 9-hour stream day, but it turns out I'm not very good at keeping track of time when I play games. So it might have ended up being, I don't know, 11 hours? Something like that. It was a great time though. I want to start by saying thank you to everybody who showed up. I had a blast. I hope you did as well. And we went through 6 different builds over that, let's say, 11-hour period. So let me highlight what we did. So first of all, these are the votes that everybody put in for the different builds on the Google form that I shared. Bow's Anarchy got 158 points, and so it was ranked 7. So Melee Speedy Monolith Farmer got voted the highest, and we did 2 builds on that. Warpath Meteor was second highest in points, so we did that as well. And then we did Shatter Strike. We chose to go with Frostbite. We also tried the new Spellblade Spark Charges unique, which hits the 0.9 unique based build bucket as well. We actually pivoted towards a Sorcerer class while doing this. And finally, we landed on a Ballista Marksman, going crit instead of ailments. So let's go into the actual builds, starting with the first Melee Speedy Monolith Farmer. And that was our Void Knight, where the objective of the build was to maximize our move speed while we're spinning around with everybody's favorite spin to win Warpath. And the way we did that was with the Dark Stride boots, which if you haven't used them, they give you 0.2% move speed per added melee flat void damage. And so thanks to these boots, if you optimize your gear, you can get something like 150 to 200 melee flat void damage fairly easily from your weapon, and then a bunch more from your passives, resulting in a very speedy build where you can just run around while just killing everything with your Warpath echoes. Towards the end of our optimization session with this build, we were running something like close to 100% movement speed, assuming we pick up the right passives once we hit level 100. The character was not fully optimized because it was only like a level 75 or so character, but it was a lot of fun, and you can really see the potential for the build because you can just, the playstyle for the build is you zoom forward, always warpathing, and your warpath leaves behind echoes. So as you're running, enemies are running into your echoes and they're just dying. So it's a really smooth playstyle like that. It's fairly safe because you're not engaging into the enemies too directly. You're leaving the echoes to do a lot of the work. It does not do great boss damage, however, and that's fine because the objective for that build was to do Speedy Monolith running. So this build performs well given its objective, I think, but I do need to push it to higher corruption and see how it performs. Where does it tap out? My guess is going to be around Monolith 300-400, and maybe with really strong gear you can get up to like 500, but this is just a guess. I have to play it out and see what happens. But overall, the playstyle is incredibly straightforward. You don't even need to use many skills. Just Warpath. Just click one button and hold, and you can watch a movie, you can do something else. Just completely enjoy 2 fun activities at the same time. The second build that we tried was a Blade Dancer 1.5 second cooldown shift, so that we can take advantage of the 50% bonus movement speed that is within the shift skill tree. And in order to get 1.5 second cooldown, you have to equip the 2 unique daggers that reduce the cooldown of your shift. And then also find cooldown reduction in your boots, in your belt, and even a few other spots as well. But the build is quite effective. It's centered around Synchronized Strike, followed up by Shadow Cascade. And because we had to run melee, we had to run Shadow Cascade in melee form and not utilize the daggers which proc Shadow Dagger. But the playstyle is really smooth and really fun. Basically every 1.5 seconds you're casting Synchronized Strike, and then shift and most things die. It's really, really fun. I quite enjoyed it. It's very refreshing. And you're always moving at like over 100% movement speed, shifting around as well. You have huge AoE on all of your melee skills, so they catch quite a bit. And then you have a few defensive skills as well, because mana is quite sustainable with the build if you itemize correctly. You don't actually need Flurry to get your mana back. We started running Flurry at the beginning, but we transitioned into something else because it was unnecessary. But keep in mind that we were constrained by having to make it a melee build. If you're trying to run this without that constraint, I think the better option is going to be to run Shadow Daggers in the Shadow Cascade skill tree and getting as much crit multi as possible, because as you know, Shadow Daggers benefit from both melee crits and throwing crit multiplier. So it's very easy to stack insane damage with those. We tried Corruption 200 or so, I think. A little bit over 200. And it felt smooth. We were also running Crazy High Dodge because there's one node in the skill tree for Shift that gives you a ton of dodge per dexterity. And since we're having such a low cooldown, it lasts for 1 second, but that's basically like 2/3 uptime. So quite a survivable build as well. But yeah, this build performed really well. I quite enjoyed it. So I definitely actually recommend this one to a lot of people that are looking for a Blade Dancer build. Give this a try. If you have the items to reduce the cooldown of Shift as much as possible, it's definitely worthwhile. The next build was Warpath Meteor, and unfortunately, I kind of had a sense that this one was not going to work out, because I tried running the Warpath belt on a Sorcerer, which can actually utilize the skill tree and get a lot more damage for the Meteor. But even then, it did not feel strong enough, the belt, even for a Sorcerer class. So I was very, very pessimistic going into this about the build working out, but I had to give it my all. So I tried my best. I spec'd into Holy Aura, proccing Flame Burst for extra crits. I spec'd into Warpath proccing Smite for extra crits as well. And so the concept was get as many crits instances as possible so that we can actually get those meteors. But I knew very well that we're not going to be able to sustain the mana. I made a mistake in trying to get mana sustain for the Warpath skill tree, but I forgot that that node needed a two-handed weapon. So that was a bit of a blunder. But even then, even if you're running two-handed, I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough mana sustain, because Meteor is just extremely expensive for a skill. And so overall, this build was a failure. It couldn't even reliably do Monolith Corruption 100. So I would not recommend to anyone. Stay away. For our fourth build, we tried running Frostbite, Shatter Strike. And for Frostbite, this is a well-known build, I think. There have been other build guides on it. I just went for crazy high attack speed, just to get as many instances as possible. And it was working quite well. It wasn't fully optimized. I tried to do a few different things, but they didn't really work out. So I feel like this build is fairly well figured out. There are two uniques that are must use: Snowdrift Boots and the Frostbite Shackles for the gloves. So it's just, there isn't much room left for that build to innovate anything. Even just chest and helm pieces are pretty straightforward, fairly obvious what you want to be putting in there. So yeah, this build is very viable. It's quite strong. I have not pushed it too far. And the other issue was that my Spellblade was only like level 88 or something. So I couldn't push too far. It didn't have an empowered monolith unlocked. We were limited in that regard because we couldn't push super high monos. But yeah, the build is fine. It's totally fine. You can definitely run it. And I would recommend it if you want to try Spellblade. For our fifth build, we tried the brand new unique Fragment of the Enigma, which gives you a lot more damage on your melee spark charges. So we wanted to run melee spark charges, but the rest of it was a little bit unknown what we wanted to do with the build. And I tried doing it as a Spellblade first, but then we realized, why run Spellblade? The Spellblade passive tree doesn't really offer much for spell damage. you're much better off running it as a sorcerer, because sorcerer has a bunch more crit chance for lightning spells. It has more crit multi, and those are just very, very meaningful when you're trying to run spark charges. And so we optimized the sorcerer. We even went with the Fractured Crown unique, which gives you another over 100% crit multi for spells. So it's a huge DPS boost. We were also applying spark charges with our Elemental Nova. There's a part in the skill tree where it applies it 100% of the time, and you can spec it into your teleport. So every time you teleport, you apply a whole bunch of spark charges. So yeah, that was the concept of the build. But then we went out to fight some enemies, and against groups of enemies, this build does fine. It's very respectable. Every single mana strike applies spark charges on every single enemy that it hits. So if you hit 10 enemies, you're applying 10 plus spark charges, and spark charges are a AoE ability. So when they blow up, they basically just blow up the entire cloud of enemies. It works great against like groups of 10 plus enemies. It actually scales with the number of enemies that you're fighting against. However, the single target damage of the build is just abysmally poor. We tried everything we could to get it as high as possible, but it just would not perform. Part of the reason for that is that the spell itself gets 50% damage effectiveness per spell point damage, which is incredibly low considering the spell also doesn't get a skill tree. So all in all, the build is not viable. Don't try it. Spark charges is not a thing in this patch. Until it gets buffed, it's not going to be a thing. That item is a nice attempt, but it's not enough. And finally, I was really curious on how Crit Ballista performs. We spec'd into that with a marksman. Unfortunately, my marksman is only like level 70 or so. It doesn't have empowered corruption unlocked and all that stuff. But still, we tried it. We got up to like 80 plus dexterity. The build scales really well with the Morning Frost boots because the damage added from them applies to your ballistas as well at 45%. So stacking dexterity is the best way to get crazy amounts of DPS from this build. Ballista are quite mana hungry, so you have to run some sort of mana generator, like Flurry for example. And yeah, you're okay once you're running Flurry and it generates like 25 mana per shot. The crit damage for my ballistas was getting quite respectable. So this build seemed very viable to me. I think it can push higher corruption fairly decently because you can just cast the ballistas ahead of you and take minimal risk. I'm hoping it functions a little bit like Flame Wraith Necros. I get the suspicion though that it will not perform as well as Flame Wraith Necros because they're quite costly from a mana perspective, so you do have to every now and then stop and hit Flurry on something. The playstyle is just not as smooth as Flame Wraiths. But the build is a lot of fun, and it's something different to try as a marksman, so I think I would like to level up my marksman and see how far I can push it. Hopefully it can do at least Corruption 300. I'm guessing it should be able to. You just have to mitigate the cold and physical resistance problems that you run into before because of Morning Frost. But yeah, I would recommend this build as well. So all in all, 4 of the 6 builds were viable and let's say successful. And 2 of the 6 builds were very much non-viable and something that I would not recommend for anyone to run. We learned a lot. I personally learned a lot about each one of these classes and a lot of these abilities, how they function, how they can be scaled up. And I think next steps for me, I'm going to be trying to push one of these builds. And for the fans of that one Lich build that I shared recently, I mean, I didn't share the build itself, but I did share like a 7-second Jorah kill. If you're curious about that one, I'm going to wait one more little patch from EHG. And if the next patch doesn't fix that problem, I think I'll do a short build guide about it. I won't go too crazy with it. I won't do a full out build guide just because it will get patched out. And so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But I'll do a short build guide to let other people have some fun, right? So if it's not getting patched out, why not? In the meantime, I'll be streaming. I'll pick one of these 4 builds that were successful and start leveling it up and pushing it a little bit higher in corruption, because I want to make a proper build guide on at least one of the 4. Right now I'm leaning towards the Marksman Ballista one, but I'm not 100% certain. We'll see. We'll see what I land on. And I haven't done any rogue builds, so I feel like I should do something rogue related. Thanks again to everybody that joined. Love y'all, and take it easy. Gochiso samadeshita.